Jack Morrow stepped down from the shuttle and felt the heavy ground beneath his boots. The air was clean and sharp, filled with the faint smell of rain that had fallen earlier. He looked around and saw tall towers and stone walls that seemed far older than anything he had ever seen on Earth. This was not a place of machines and glass cities. This was a land where tradition ruled, where history was carved into every brick and banner. He was nervous, but he kept walking. Soldiers in shining armor lined the road, their spears held straight, their eyes never moving. They watched him pass as if measuring every step he took. Jack knew he did not belong here. He was only an engineer, not a soldier, not a noble. But he had been sent because he carried knowledge no one else had, and because someone believed his presence might help bring peace. The road led him toward the great palace. Its gates were tall, carved with symbols he did not understand. The doors opened slowly as he approached, and for a moment Jack thought he should turn back. But he forced himself to keep going. He had traveled too far to let fear take him now. Inside, the hall was vast and filled with people. Nobles in long robes stood together, whispering to one another. Guards stood at the walls, still as statues. High above, banners of red and gold hung from the ceiling. The sound of his boots echoed on the stone floor as he walked forward, guided by a servant who spoke no words. At the far end, on a raised platform, stood Queen Alara. Her crown glimmered in the light, and her eyes seemed to see through him. Now, she was tall, graceful, and carried herself with a strength that made Jack lower his head in respect. He stopped before her and bowed, though he was not sure if he did it right. For a long moment, the hall was silent. Then the Queen spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, but it carried through the hall like the strike of a bell. She welcomed him, called him a guest of the crown, and spoke of his journey across the stars. Jack listened, unsure of how to answer. He felt the weight of many eyes upon him, watching his every move. Then something unexpected happened. The Queen turned her head, and the great doors behind her throne opened. A figure stepped forward, and the hall seemed to hold its breath. A young woman entered. Her hair was long and red, flowing like fire. She wore a dress of crimson and gold that caught the light with every step. A crown rested on her head, smaller than the Queen's but no less bright. Her eyes, clear and sharp, searched the room until they landed on Jack. He froze. He had heard whispers on his way here, stories of a hidden princess, someone kept away from danger and intrigue. Many had doubted she was even real. But here she was, walking forward as if she had been waiting for this moment. The hall was silent. Jack could hear only the sound of his own heartbeat. The young woman stopped beside the Queen, her gaze never leaving him. Her face showed no fear, no surprise. Instead, there was something else in her eyes, something he could not understand, but could not ignore. Jack lowered his head again, unsure if he was meant to speak. The Queen introduced her daughter, Princess Celine. The words seemed to echo in his mind. He looked up and met her eyes once more, and in that moment, he felt a strange pull, as if the space between them had narrowed in a way no one else could see. The nobles whispered, the guards shifted, but Jack heard none of it. All he could think of was the princess, revealed before him at last. Her reaction was calm, yet filled with meaning, and though no words had passed between them. Jack knew this was the beginning of something far greater than he had ever imagined. Jack stood still as the hall slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Whispers ran through the nobles like a soft wave, their eyes darting from the Queen to the princess, and then back to him. He knew he had become the center of something he did not fully understand. He had come only as a guest, yet the princess's sudden appearance had made his presence seem like fate. Princess Celine stepped forward. Her movements were graceful but strong, each step echoing across the stone floor. She did not look away from Jack. It was as if she wanted him to know she had chosen this moment, not her mother, not the court. When she reached the center of the hall, she stopped and lowered her head slightly, a gesture that felt both royal and human. Jack tried to steady his breath. He had spoken in front of leaders before, but never in a place like this, never in front of someone whose very presence made the hall go silent. When the Queen asked him to speak, his voice came out softer than he meant. He thanked her for her welcome, for her trust, and for allowing him to stand in such a hall. His words were plain, not the polished speech of a courtier, but honest. Some nobles frowned, others whispered, but the Queen's eyes remained steady. She listened carefully, and when he finished, she nodded once. Then she turned to her daughter. Celine's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. It was not mockery, nor was it surprise. It was something else, something private, as if she understood him in a way the others did not. The queen dismissed the court soon after. Nobles bowed and drifted out, their robes sweeping the floor, their whispers filling the air. Soldiers marched away in perfect lines, and soon the hall grew quieter. Only Jack, the queen, and Celine remained, along with a few trusted guards who stood like stone. The queen spoke of duty, of loyalty, and of the bonds between her people and those who came from afar. Jack listened with respect, but his eyes kept pulling toward the princess. He noticed the way her hands rested calmly at her side. The way she stood tall, though the weight of so many eyes had just been upon her. When the queen left the hall with her attendants, Celine remained. For the first time, the silence between them was theirs alone. Jack did not know what words to say. He searched for something polite, something formal. But before he could speak, Celine stepped closer. "You are not what I expected," she said, her voice quiet yet clear. Jack blinked, unsure if it was an insult or something else. "I am only who I am," he replied, his tone careful. Her eyes softened and she tilted her head as if studying him. "That may be enough," she said. He wanted to ask what she meant, but before he could, one of the guards coughed gently, reminding them that the hall was not theirs alone. Celine glanced at the guard, and then back at Jack. "Walk with me tomorrow," she said. It was not a question. It was a command, yet it carried a strange warmth. Jack nodded, surprised by his own eagerness. "I will," he answered. She turned and walked away, her gown trailing behind her like fire on stone. The guards followed her, leaving Jack alone in the vast hall. He stood there, trying to understand what had just passed between them. That night in his guest chambers, Jack could not sleep. The palace was quiet, the thick stone walls shutting out the sounds of the city beyond. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment in the hall. The queen's steady gaze, the whispers of the nobles, and above all, the eyes of the princess. Her reaction had carried something he could not name, something that reached beyond duty or formality. He wondered why she had been hidden, why she had chosen this moment to appear, and why her first words to him had felt like they carried more weight than any speech. He did not know the answers, but he felt certain of one thing. Tomorrow, when he walked beside her, his life would no longer belong only to himself. The next morning came with soft light pouring through tall windows. Jack rose early, though he had hardly slept. He dressed simply, the way he always did, but his thoughts were heavy. He was not sure what walking with the princess would mean. He was a guest, an outsider, and yet she had spoken to him as though she had known him before. A guard arrived at his chamber and told him the princess was waiting. Jack followed the guard through long hallways lined with tapestries and tall stone pillars. At the end of the corridor, in a garden filled with bright flowers and marble paths, Celine stood waiting. She wore no crown today, only a simple gown of white and gold. The morning light touched her hair and made it shine like flame. When Jack stepped into the garden, she turned to him with a quiet smile. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of birds filled the silence, and the smell of roses drifted through the air. Then she began to walk, and Jack fell into step beside her. "You are different from the men here," Celine said at last. Jack glanced at her, unsure of what to say. "I am not trained for courts and crowns," he answered. "I build things. I fix things. I am only an engineer." She nodded slowly. "Perhaps that is why I wanted to see you. Everyone here is bound by duty, by rules, by the weight of old names."
"You're not."
They walked past a fountain where water spilled gently over carved stone. Jack could see children of the court playing at the far end of the garden, but their laughter faded quickly as they noticed the princess. Celine did not look at them. She kept her eyes forward, her voice low enough so only Jack could hear. "I was hidden for many years," she said. "My mother wanted to protect me. She feared those who wished to take the throne. I grew up behind walls, watching the world from shadows." She paused and turned her gaze toward Jack. "But last night, when you arrived, I knew it was time." Her words stirred something inside him. He felt both honored and unsettled. "Why me?" he asked. "I am no knight. I do not understand your court or your enemies." Celine stopped walking and faced him fully. Her eyes were steady, filled with a strength that surprised him, because you are not part of this world. You see it with clear eyes. You are not trapped by fear or ambition. And I need someone who can stand beside me without being bound by the past. Jack did not know how to answer. Her words carried a weight far greater than any compliment. They carried expectation. He looked away, toward the tall walls of the garden. I am only a man, he said softly. That may be enough, she replied. Their walk continued, but the air between them had changed. She told him more of her life, the lessons her mother taught her, the dangers whispered in dark corners of the palace. Jack listened, every word deepening his sense of responsibility. He had come as a guest, but now he felt caught in something much larger. As they returned to the palace gates, voices rose from within. Guards rushed past them, their armor clattering as they ran. Selena's expression hardened, and she quickened her steps. Jack followed closely, unsure of what was happening. Inside the hall, the queen was speaking to her advisors. Her face was calm, but her tone was sharp. She spoke of plots uncovered, of enemies gathering strength beyond the walls. When she saw her daughter, she paused, and for the first time Jack saw worry in her eyes. Selene moved to stand at her mother's side. Jack remained a step behind, yet he felt the weight of the queen's gaze fall on him. It was as though she was measuring his worth in silence. The court buzzed with tension. Nobles argued, some demanding more soldiers, others whispering of betrayal. Through it all, Selene stood firm, her presence commanding attention even when she said nothing. Jack realized then that her choice to reveal herself had not been a simple act of courage. It had been a challenge, a signal to both friend and enemy that she was ready to stand in the light. And now, with danger pressing closer, she would need more than symbols. She would need allies. As the queen ended the council, she turned to Jack once more. Her eyes carried no warmth, only the question of whether he was strong enough to stand in the storm that was coming. The palace grew restless in the days that followed. Whispers filled every corridor, and guards doubled their watch at every gate. Jack could feel the tension each time he walked through the halls. Servants hurried with their heads lowered, and nobles spoke in hushed tones. The news of plots against the crown had shaken everyone. Jack spent most of his time near the princess. She often asked him questions about Earth and the machines he had built. He spoke of engines, bridges, and simple tools, things that seemed ordinary to him, but made her eyes light up with wonder. She told him that their world relied on tradition, but perhaps it was time for new ways. Still, danger pressed closer. One night, as Jack walked back to his chamber, he saw shadows moving along the outer wall. The moonlight caught the glint of steel, and before he could call out, an arrow struck the stone near his head. He ducked and shouted for the guards. They rushed forward, chasing the intruders, but the attackers vanished into the night. The queen summoned him the next morning. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. She asked him to explain what he had seen. Jack described the attack in detail, and she listened without interruption. When he finished, she leaned back on her throne. You are not trained as a soldier, she said, yet you survived. Perhaps you see what others do not. Jack hesitated, but then spoke. He told her of ways to strengthen the walls, to build traps and alarms that would warn of intruders before they reached the gates. The queen's advisor scoffed at first, but Selene leaned forward, her expression filled with interest. Let him try, she said firmly. And so Jack began his work. With the help of the palace guards, he built simple defenses wires that rang bells when touched, hidden pits near weak points in the wall, and lanterns that burned brighter to reveal movement at night. His designs were simple, but they worked. Within days, 2 more attempts at infiltration were stopped before they even began. The soldiers began to respect him. Some even asked him to teach them small tricks, and though Jack was no warrior, he shared what he knew. Slowly, he felt less like a stranger and more like part of the defense of the palace. Through it all, Selene was never far. She watched his work with interest and often walked beside him as he explained each design. Sometimes she smiled at his ideas, calling them clever, sometimes strange, but always she listened. Their bond grew stronger. He began to see not only her strength, but also her fears. At night, when they spoke in quiet corners of the palace, she confessed her worries. She feared that the nobles would betray her, that her mother would not live long enough to guide her, and that she would fail her people. Jack listened and told her what he believed. That strength did not come only from crowns and soldiers. It came from courage, from standing when it was hardest to stand. She looked at him then with eyes that seemed brighter than fire. But danger was never far. One evening, during a feast, the lights in the great hall suddenly went dark. Shouts rose, and steel clashed. Rebels had entered through hidden tunnels. Chaos filled the room as guards rushed to protect the queen. Jack grabbed Selena's arm and pulled her behind a pillar. He could see men in dark cloaks moving through the hall, striking at anyone who stood in their way. The queen's soldiers fought bravely, but the attack was fierce. Selene tried to step forward, but Jack held her back. "Not yet," he whispered. "Wait for the right moment." Together they moved through the shadows, avoiding the clash of blades. Jack spotted the opening of the tunnel where the rebels had entered. He knew if more came through, the palace would fall. Without waiting for orders, he rushed toward it. Selene called his name, but he did not stop. At the mouth of the tunnel, he pulled down one of the lanterns and smashed it against the ground. Flames leapt up, blocking the path. The rebels shouted as smoke filled the air. Jack coughed, his eyes burning, but he held his ground until soldiers arrived to push the enemy back. When it was over, the hall was scarred, the floor stained with fire and steel. But the queen still stood, her crown shining in the dim light, and Selene stood beside her, her hand clutching Jack's. The queen's eyes met his. And though she said nothing, he saw it in her gaze. He was no longer just a guest. The palace was quiet after the attack, but the silence was heavy. Smoke still lingered in the halls, and broken weapons lay scattered on the floor. Servants cleaned the damage, while soldiers stood watch at every door. Though the rebels had been pushed back, everyone knew they would return. Jack walked the grounds with weary steps. His hands were scraped and his clothes were torn from the fight. Yet his mind was restless. He'd seen the fear in Selene's eyes, not of the enemy, but of the weight she now carried. The people had seen her revealed, and there would be no hiding again. The queen called for him the next morning. Her voice was firm, but her eyes were softer than before. She told him that his courage had saved many lives, and though he was not of her court, he had stood as one of her own. Jack bowed his head, humbled by her words. Later that day, Selene asked him to walk with her again. They moved through the garden, but the air was no longer calm. Soldiers patrolled even here, their armor glinting in the sunlight. Selene stopped near the fountain and looked at him with quiet strength. "The time has come," she said. "I cannot stay in the shadows. The people must know me as their princess, and one day as their queen. But I cannot do it alone." Jack felt his chest tighten. "You have your soldiers, your nobles, your court," he said. She shook her head. "They followed duty, not heart. You were different. When the hall burned, you did not think of rank or title. You acted. That is the kind of strength I need beside me." Her words struck deep. He wanted to tell her he was only a man, an outsider, someone who had never sought power, yet he could not deny what he had begun to feel. Her courage, her hope, and her trust had become a part of him. The days that followed were filled with preparation. The queen announced a great gathering where Selene would stand before the people for the first time. Word spread quickly, and crowds began to fill the city. Some came out of loyalty, others out of curiosity, and still others with doubt in their hearts. Jack worked with the soldiers to strengthen defenses, but he also walked among the people. He listened to their fears, their anger, and their hope. Many were uncertain if Selene could lead them. Others whispered that her revelation was only a game of power. But Jack spoke to them honestly, telling them what he had seen, what she had done, and how she stood not in fear, but in courage. Last the day arrived. The great square outside the palace was filled with thousands. Banners waved in the wind, and the air was alive with voices. The queen stood first, her crown bright beneath the sun. Beside her stood Selene, dressed in white and gold, her head held high. When she stepped forward, the crowd fell silent. Her voice carried clear and steady. She spoke of truth, of being hidden, of watching her people suffer while she waited. She spoke of the moment she chose to reveal herself, not out of safety, but out of duty. She told them she would no longer live in shadows, that she would stand with them, fight with them, and lead them into a brighter future. The crowd stirred. Some cheered, some shouted doubt. Then, when the noise swelled, Selene raised her hand and pointed toward Jack. who stood among the guards. "This man came from far away," she said. "He is not of our court, not of our blood. Yet he risked his life when others hesitated. He saw us not as crowns or thrones, but as people. And it is his courage that reminded me to stand here before you." Jack felt every eye turn toward him. His heart pounded, but he did not look away. He met the gaze of the people, and in their faces he saw something shift. Doubt gave way to respect. Fear gave way to hope. Cheers rose louder and louder until the square thundered with voices. Selena's eyes found Jack's through the crowd, and in that moment he understood. His arrival had not been chance. It had been the spark that changed everything. That night, as the torches burned and the city sang, the queen looked upon her daughter and the man beside her. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in many years, she allowed herself to believe in a future brighter than the past. Jack stood at Selena's side, no longer just a guest, no longer just an outsider. He had become part of their story, part of their hope, and part of their destiny. And though no words were needed, he remembered the first moment he saw her, when the hall grew silent and her eyes met his. Her reaction had said it all. Their lives were forever bound,